Now, it's been 3 decades since the historic free elections in South Africa ushered in an era of peace and the promise of prosperity. Yet the World Bank declares South Africa as the most unequal society in the world, with unemployment reaching crisis levels of 33.5%. Now, as South Africa marks 30 years of democracy this year, we look at key moments in our democratic history. And our guest this morning is Baleka Mbete, rising from fighting apartheid to becoming one of South Africa's most powerful women, serving as Deputy President, the Speaker of the National Assembly and the Chair of the ANC. It is our pleasure and privilege to welcome her here onto Morning Live. It's an absolute pleasure to have you, and thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you very much, Leanne, for inviting me, and thank you very much to South Africans for having sustained these 30 years and making us reach this point. To be able to reflect.
And there's a lot to reflect on because, you know, as much as we've travelled a very difficult road and we're still travelling this road. But let's go back to before we hit the years of democracy. You were there, you were a part of the struggle. Perhaps you want to reflect on those days before democracy entered into South Africa.
Yes, Leanne, it's been actually moments since the beginning of this year of ongoing reflections as we were looking back at where we had come from. We were looking back at the dreams that we entered the democratic dispensation having. We were looking back at how well we have fared, what has gone well, what have been the challenges, what perhaps we need to focus on as we think of answers to the question, how else could we have done it? What else must we focus on as we try to improve certain aspects of how we do things? So it's all those questions. And as you say in your introduction, it's an ongoing process of reflection. And I mean, life itself is a lesson. It's lessons that never end.
It certainly is. I mean, if you take a 30-year-old individual and you look at where that person is in their lives, you know that the beginning of your life is fun, it's games, it's dreams, it's all these reflections that you do have of what it could be like and what it's going to be like. And then that road starts getting harder and harder and harder because you realize that it is difficult and the road is full of bumps and the road is full of problems. In hindsight, looking back, what are some of the things you believe could have been done differently?
Well, being who I am, how I am in my own individual character, for me, the cultural context of life or aspect of life always emerges as very important. And I feel that we dropped the ball when it came to that. And we have had moments of engaging about how it happened, why, how could we, and all of that. For instance, I think of a comrade who's now deployed elsewhere, out of government as such. And he was telling me that he had had a moment to engage with one of the former presidents about why we had not, as the leading component of the state, as the African National Congress, we had not stayed in the driving seat of being on top of arts, culture, and heritage as a whole package of life and the portfolio. For instance, when now you are configuring your government and you are looking at how best you will channel the resources to go so that you actually develop and you focus in a particular area. in our reflections, and I happened to be honored to have a number of meetings with some of the senior people who have, in the decades, been deployed in this particular portfolio. And I'm talking about our poet laureate, Comrade Wali Sirote. I'm talking about the comrade who was at some point one of our chief whips in Parliament, and that is Matole Motsecha. We had many meetings together with other people in this year of reflecting on what had not gone right.
Yeah.
And we acknowledged, and in fact we had a very important gathering at the Freedom Park. As you would know, the Freedom Park is the shrine of South Africa's liberation struggle. It's where we have a very holy space called Isivivane, which is where the spirits gather. We went there and we acknowledged to ourselves that the movement had not stayed on top of leading, being focused and guiding all the time in the area of arts, culture and heritage. Yes, there was a portfolio, a ministry in government, and yes, we kept in touch with them, we who were working full-time at a certain point in certain aspects of that whole portfolio. But the key moments of reflections that always happen in the African National Congress constitutional structures were taken away, because for 3 decades there were no conference strategic discussions in the ANC, the leading party that was leading government. And therefore I find that as we collectively discovered, we dropped the ball. And therefore, as we now have a new moment, new beginnings, hopefully we will find ways creatively and strategically and deeply of picking up that ball and making sure that we know what we are doing, and the GNU itself finds creative ways of ensuring that this portfolio is not neglected.
Indeed. So that's arts, that's culture. Those are things that speak to us as a country, which are vitally important, as you say, that you feel as a movement were ignored and perhaps put on the back burner and not given enough attention. However, there are other issues as well that I imagine you look back and you think to yourself, because earlier this year you were obviously doing a lot of campaigning for the ANC ahead of the elections, and you were out on the trail, and one of the things that you would say was, you know, we're not worried, we put our heads down on our pillows and we sleep peacefully at night, we're not too worried. Do you really do that? I mean, when we see the unemployment rate, when we see the state of South Africa and what we're in right now. And this was under the governance of the ANC, and of course you playing a vital role. Do you really sleep peacefully knowing that so many people are struggling under the leadership of the ANC?
I do sleep peacefully because I give myself the permission to do so. I also happen to know that mistakes were made. And I acknowledge that, I accept that. I am not one who says, no, we're perfect, everything has gone very well. No, not everything has gone well. And of course, we see the signs of that. But where I am happy is that this past election result has sobered us up, has made us sit up. And I was at the Lekgotla for 2 days, 2 weekends ago. Of course, I've been part of the ongoing conversations in different platforms about the election result, how we should respond to that, what we should do, where we should tighten up. But what I found very encouraging was the mood in the room when we now not only sat in the plenary and reflected honestly about what had happened and what it means to us. But I also was happy to find that the energy in the room, all of us had, yes, gone to cry about the election result, but had come back and said, what does it mean?
Yeah.
What must we do? Where must we focus? And in the spaces I was part of, collective discussions, for instance, I was in the space where we were looking at the international relations space. We were reflecting very soberly. We were very honest about what needs to be done in order to respond appropriately to the meanings of the messages that are definitely what the people are telling us in the election results. So I am, perhaps it's out of being now many more years than 7 decades, so I'm happy.
Yeah. Yeah.
We are in a moment where we are reflecting soberly, not only, and this is something that we've touched upon on the road, get out of the caucus room, because South Africa is much bigger than the caucus room. Caucus room is where you retreat as a family, as a few, as those people that must look at those things that are sensitive and we can only talk about when we're on our own.
Yeah.
But most of the time we've got to be out there where it matters most, because that's where the actual life of South Africans is lived on a broader level.
And I think that's where the criticism from a lot of South Africans came from, is that, I mean, when we read what you did for the struggle, you were exiled from this country, you spent time behind bars, you lived in Tanzania, you lived in Botswana, you lived in Zimbabwe, you got married outside of the country, you only got back here in the 1980s. You fought the struggle to get the freedom for South Africans, and you know what it's like to struggle. Perhaps it's when you get into the seat of power that perhaps you begin to enjoy the good life and forget that there are people still out there that you're serving. And is that perhaps the lesson? And that is what the South Africans criticize the leaders in government for, is that they are out of touch with the reality of what South Africans are going through. So what I'm gathering from what you're saying is, being locked in rooms and talking and things like that, is that through the years, through the power, through gaining all of this, you lost touch with what South Africans really needed. And then we sit at a case like this where unemployment figures are skyrocketing because those opportunities have not been made. And these are under the hands of the government that you served in. Is that perhaps what happened? You lost touch with the people?
Yes and no. And yes, when it comes to certain individuals, and you can actually identify who, how, when. But broadly speaking, the movement never lost touch. The ANC never lost touch. However, because it's human beings that go out to implement what is supposed to be implemented, what is supposed to be the collectively agreed upon policy and approach to things, those individuals drop the ball, and therefore it has implications for the broader collective and for, in fact, the image of government, which is the ANC government. Government is not the same thing as the ANC. They are distinct, but of course the ANC is leading there in government, and therefore I'm saying, because it's human beings that now have to take things forward and go and lead in particular micro spaces where things have to be followed through, resources have to be put into certain actions that must achieve certain goals. You find that things don't always go right according to plan. And that's where now we're back in the drawing board and saying, how else? What else? Where must we tighten up? Where must we make sure that things never go wrong, even with that individual that sometimes takes advantage of the opportunity of being in a very senior position as a minister or as a director general, or there's a confusion between...
Or as a president, because...
Even as a president.
Because this, and it would be remiss of me not to bring up former President Jacob Zuma. And many people say that you protected him. I mean, especially during the years of the chaos that we saw in apartheid, I mean, in Parliament, I beg your pardon. And you were the Speaker at the time, and you did, in a way, protect him. He was the President of the country.
I'm glad you are raising that,
Good.
Ian,
Go for it.
Because it gives me an opportunity to say this. it is not true that I protected Jacob Zuma. In fact, I wonder how many of you ever do your homework, go to see and read my submission to the Zondo Commission when I was called upon at a certain point to go and answer questions about what had happened in those years of President Zuma. There in the submission, which is not what the newspapers used to write about, by the way, because they never look at the truth, they never look at research, at the facts. They say what is common rumor, what is the general image. And there was an image of me having protected President Jacob Zuma to a point where, if you will look back and admit yourself, when I took a decision at the point at which the Constitutional Court had said it is up to Parliament to decide whether the method of voting on a particular time, in a particular motion against the president, whether it should be private or it should be open. And I said it shall be open. People were surprised because I was supposedly this stooge of Jacob Zuma. So they couldn't relate now me deciding that, no, let people vote openly so that, in fact, it's clear how people have voted, because it was not true that I was protecting him. In fact, I used to say, how am I protecting him? Because even if the president had been F.W. de Klerk at the time, I would have taken the same positions, because the Speaker takes decisions on the basis of rules of Parliament. Yeah. You don't have room to say, I like him and therefore the decision is going to be this way. No, it's not that way. But the media chose a particular line, stuck to it, and confused everybody. And therefore, when the moment came when I showed that actually I'm deciding otherwise, they were shocked.
And that's where you have your voice and you're able to. I have to wrap this. We've got to go to an ad break, unfortunately, but I can't do this without you giving a message for women during this Women's Month and the reflection of women leaders in this country, because you were our Deputy President. You held top positions, and not many people and countries can brag about something like that, that we have women in very top positions. However, there's still a way to go. So just very quickly, your message to women and the future of leadership in this country.
To women, I want to congratulate our women for continuing to be the symbol of resilience in our families, in our communities, in our life broadly, in every sector. Women are there being a symbol of determination, of forward movement. And on your behalf, I am going to have lunch on Saturday with Gertrude Shope in Gaborone, and coming back the following day, just to say to Mama, well done. She's 99 now.
Wow, wow, wow. Well, we applaud you. We thank you for coming in. And it is a pleasure speaking to you here on the program and hearing your story, which is so important to all South Africans. Baleka Mbete, the former Deputy President of South Africa and former Speaker of the National Assembly, reflecting on South Africa's 30 years of democracy.